inside look at politics and policy in St. Paul from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Adkins, and with me is Shawn Peterson, Associate Director of Public Policy for the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Well, Shawn, it's Holy Week, and our state legislature is on Easter Passover break. Many legislatures don't even take a break. North Dakota, for example, is going to be working into Friday and then start up again on Monday. So this is kind of something unique that our legislature does during this special time of year.
It is, Jason, and having been there for many years myself, it is a good break. It's a good chance for them to go home, be with their families, recharge both physically and spiritually during Holy Week, and then come back, because once they get back, it's pretty much the final stretch. So there's really no more breaks after that until the constitutional deadline of May 22nd.
So literally just a month left for negotiations once the legislators get back next week.
That's right. Yep. Once they get back, it'll be full steam ahead on conference committees for many of the omnibus bills we've talked about, and they'll be on the House floor and the Senate floor almost exclusively all day trying to get smaller bills passed into the governor's desk.
So what happened last week before the legislators went on break?
So last week was kind of really the sprint before the break. It was trying to get all the omnibus bills passed. They were able to get every single omnibus bill, from the tax bill, health and human services, education, ag, public safety, all those bills passed in both the House and Senate, and with all the bills that go into them wrapped up, and they got all their work done before they went on break, and so they can really get into the meat of it when they get back from Easter Passover break.
So the main work of the legislature, passing a state budget for the biennium, that work's really begun in earnest. We have budget bills in both houses that were passed before break. What's going to happen after legislators get back on April 18th?
So they'll get back. Obviously, those bills that were passed in the House and the Senate are very different in some aspects. A lot of them contain some of the same things. So what they'll do is, when they get back, the Speaker and the President of the Senate will appoint conferees to those respective bills, and those conferees will begin that work of sitting down, looking at those bills side by side, deciding what's the same and what's different, and then starting to negotiate and put one bill together that they can repass and send to the governor's desk in each of those legislative areas.
And then they have to create a bill that the governor will sign as well.
That's the tricky part. Yes,
that's the tricky part. And there seems to be a bit of distance in terms of both spending and taxation priorities among both bodies of the legislature and the governor.
Yes, that's true. So I think it seems like in the legislature right now, the priority is a little bit more on tax relief and cutting probably more spending than the governor would like. I think the governor is looking at some tax relief, but actually increasing spending. So obviously, there's differences to be worked out, but it's all negotiated, for the last month.
And differences in priorities, differences in emphasis. We always say that a budget is a moral document, that a budget reflects our spending priorities as a state. We should treat our budget like we would our household budget. We take care of the first priority needs first, and the most vulnerable in our homes, and then we go into the amenities. And so it'll be interesting to see how they wrangle those differences over the next month. We shouldn't be surprised to see the governor veto some of those bills. And then what happens if the governor does veto any of those omnibus bills?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he vetoes a lot of the major spending bills in the tax bill. At least for the first round, that's sort of the dance that they do. They send him some things that they know he probably isn't going to like, and he shows his disapproval by vetoing it. But then that's really where negotiation can start at that point. There'll be some things that the governor does agree with the legislature, and so they'll put those issues aside, and then they'll start working on the things that they don't agree on. Hopefully what they'll do, rather than trying to repass all these new bills, hopefully they'll take the bills they've already passed and kind of make that as the framework to start negotiating with the governor and obviously his staff and the commissioners.
So as negotiations between the governor and the legislature go forward, we can expect over the next month a lot of positioning and posturing for those negotiations, both sides trying to get the most competitive edge really that they can, both at the legislature but also in the media as well. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch going forward. Shawn, what are some of the, we've been blessed with a lot of our key priorities have been inserted in one or both omnibus budget bills or tax bills in the House and the Senate. What are some of those provisions that people should be watching for to see how they do in the final budget outcomes?
Yeah, we were very fortunate. I think most of our provisions are at least in one bill, and some provisions are in two bill. Let's start with education. So our Opportunity Scholarship tax credit was included in some form in both the House and Senate tax bills. So that's great. We've talked about that on the show before. In addition, in the education realm, we had some non-public pupil improvements dealing with textbooks and counseling for students K through 6, mental health counseling. And those provisions were, the textbook piece was included in both K-12 bills in the House and Senate. That's great. And our provision for mental health counseling was included in the Senate K-12 bill. So that'll be negotiated in conference as well. So that's great. In the area of agriculture, we had an urban agriculture initiative. That was included in the House side, the House Agriculture Finance Bill. Not in the Senate side, but that'll be negotiated, and we're going to hopefully go over there and see what we can do about that. In the area of, we've talked about MFIP before on the show, the Minnesota Family Investment Program. There was a $13 increase included in the Senate Health and Human Services Finance Bill. Not again in the House, but we're hopeful that once it gets into conference, we can talk about that a little bit as well.
And that's an important provision. We know that human services consumes a huge portion of our state budget, and oftentimes with Republican legislatures, we're talking about cuts in human services, cuts to programs like MFIP. This year we're not talking about cuts, gratefully, and in fact we're talking about increases to the Minnesota Family Investment Program and other provisions, like another provision to make the Minnesota Family Investment Program more marriage friendly as well. So we think a lot of that can be attributed especially to something like Catholics of the Capitol, where Catholics came down and spoke specifically about those issues, and really shows the impact that advocacy from people in the pew really has. It's not just, we're not talking about cuts, gratefully, we're really talking about, in fact, increases to help those people build that ladder out of poverty.
In the marriage piece that you just spoke about, that was actually included in both bills, so that's a very good sign, and very good possibility then that's going to be in the final bill that's sent to the governor's desk. And we don't, at least right now, foresee any reason why he wouldn't be amenable to signing at least that piece. But again, it's part of a larger bill that may or may not get vetoed, so we just have to make sure that that piece stays in till the very end of negotiations. I think the other piece that we haven't talked about that was included in both Health and Human Services bills was the Palliative Care Advisory Committee. So that's great that piece was included in both bills. So we can look forward, hopefully, to having that get to the governor's desk.
And that speaks to our work as well, trying to advance care. A state, maybe make Minnesota a state that advances care and not hastens death. We should be choosing positive care options and support for programs that help people in difficult circumstances, not embrace policies such as assisted suicide, which is not compassionate, which is not care, and in fact threatens to limit the healthcare choices of many Minnesotans because of the incentives that were around surrounding cost that are built within that. So we're excited about better palliative care, hopefully, and discussions around that moving forward in the Health and Human Services bill.
Yes. And then, and then there were some things that weren't included in either bill. An increase for the working family tax credit, unfortunately, did not make it in either bill. But we know that's a priority for the governor. So that's something that the governor will bring to the table and say, it's not in either bill. This is a priority for me. And that's really when the horse trading starts at the end of the session. So as we always say, it's never over till it's over, and nothing is ever dead at the legislature until the final gavel hits. So we just have to be vigilant and keep our eye out for these bills.
Well, and as always, folks can follow these pieces of legislation through the Minnesota Catholic Conference Bill Tracker, which you can find at mncatholic.org under the legislation tab, and then click on bills as well. Shawn will continue to keep up on these negotiations, especially in our next edition of Inside the Capitol, but we wish all of you a blessed Holy Week, a prayerful Triduum, and a joyful Easter. Thanks very much. It's been great to be with you again. Follow all this legislation and more at mncatholic.org. That's mncatholic.org. This has been Inside the Capitol, your look at politics and policy in St. Paul from a Catholic perspective.